Hello YouTube, I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney, and on this channel, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users, getting folks the answers they need from an employment attorney. We have a question here. A question from YouTube user Tech5280, who asks us, can you explain how pretext works when you're engaged in protected activity in an at-will state? Yes. So we have other videos on the channel explaining what a pretext is, what protected activity is, the dynamic between those two, and those videos are going to be valuable to this conversation. I'm going to backfill with some general definitions and some general information, but those videos are going to be longer, more drawn out, more complete discussions of those topics. Here, I think Tech 5280 is getting at a core source of confusion for claimants in this field, for plaintiffs in this field, for employees, right? So I think this one really has merit. We're gonna dig into it and answer it. Let's start with what is a protected activity in the field of employment law. That's actually even too broad. So we're going to deal with workplace discrimination, workplace sexual harassment cases only. We're not even going to get into wage disputes or OSHA activity. None of that. NLRB activity. We're just going to deal with workplace discrimination, workplace sexual harassment. Because there's some key differences, some caveats, some additional information as you get into those other fields. Keep it tight. Keep it tight. All right. So, protected activity. If you are opposing discrimination or in the workplace, or opposing sexual harassment in the workplace, complaining about discrimination or sexual harassment in the workplace, or participating in an investigation of workplace discrimination or workplace sexual harassment, you are engaged in what is called protected activity. When you engage in protected activity, you get a magically new protected, a newly formed protected class. You become someone who has engaged in protected activity. And it's protected just like age or religion, like all the other protected classes, of which, depending on where you are, there could be anywhere from 16 to 30, depending on who you ask and what the local laws say. Now, that's what protected activity is, right? Protected activity is something you do. Usually, a protected class is something tied to your identity, right? Like your orientation, your race, your national origin, your age, your gender, right? There's a whole bunch of them, and they're identity based. Here, the protected activity is something you do, which gives you a protected class, which is a little bit different. And you can have both, right? You can say, hey, I've been targeted as a victim of discrimination, and now I'm complaining about that discrimination. Great, you're now both a victim of discrimination, so you have the protected class for your given form of discrimination that you're experiencing, but you also have complained, so you've engaged in protected activities, so you're in another protected class for someone who has engaged in protected activity, right? And when you engage in protected activity, when you have that protected class, you gain some protections against retaliation. And what happens is, under the federal laws, and you check with local counsel for your local laws wherever you are, but certainly many local laws as well, state and local laws, if you engage in protected activity and then something bad happens to you in the workplace, we'll call it a negative workplace consequence. There's a presumption that the bad thing that happened to you in retaliation for your protected activity. And there's some burden shifting, and we have a lot of videos on retaliation claims and how this works that we're not going to get into it, but it's suffice it to say that often that claim is slightly lower risk because you have less burden to prove that claim than you do to prove most other claims, right? There's some belief on the basis of the court or whoever your finder of fact is that they can assume there's retaliation, and the employer has more of the job to disprove the retaliation instead of you, as is more normal, having the duty to prove your case, right? Like you have to prove it was retaliatory. Here, that's not. It's a little bit easier for you on this claim. And with retaliation claims, you get that presumption, you get that protection. You also open up a third class of damages under the federal laws called punitive damages. And again, right off the bat, people are going to be like, well, I know all about punitive damages from such and such or this and that. It is different. There are punitive damages under the laws of various states for various things. There's also punitive damages under federal laws for other things. Here, we're just talking about punitive damages flowing from retaliation claims under the federal laws tied to workplace discrimination and workplace sexual harassment. Okay? Very, very narrow. I can't teach you to become an employment attorney in a YouTube channel, but I can certainly teach you how to understand your claims. So that's what we're doing. Now, you have now a primer on what a protected activity is, what a protected class in terms of, vis-a-vis protected activities would be, and why that's potentially valuable in terms of protecting you and giving you a claim. Tech 5280 brings up the idea of an at-will state. Now, technically, all 50 states in the United States are at will. There's a couple of caveats. There's a couple of differences. But generally speaking, and always check with local counsel, I am not qualified to advise you about the laws of every state. Generally speaking, think of at-will employment as the law in all 50 states, and think of it generally like this. Just make sure you check your local states to make sure this general definition is correct. Under at-will employment, you can be terminated for any non-discriminatory reason, and it's really any non-discriminatory, non-retaliatory reason, or no reason at all. The end. And that shocks a lot of people. There's a lot of people who call up employment attorneys and say things like, it wasn't fair, it wasn't right, this was wrongful termination. But of course, it's probably not wrongful termination unless there's some kind of discrimination or sexual harassment or retaliation in play. Because if you're in an at-will state, and almost certainly you are, because all 50 states are basically at will, you can be fired for any non-discriminatory reason. Now, Tech 5280 asks us, hey, what does a pretext look like when you engage in protected activity in an at-will state? A pretext is when the employer is trying to make up a legal reason to fire you and say that's the real reason they're firing you because they don't want to admit they're engaged in discrimination or retaliation. What does the pretext look like? Very simple. You're in an at-will state, so the employer is going to make up a reason why they're firing you, and that reason will be one of the near infinite number of reasons they could fire you in an at-will state. It will be anything but workplace discrimination, workplace sexual harassment, or like coming after you because you complained about something, like discrimination or sexual harassment, right? And with the retaliation claim tied to protected activity, that pretext is something they're going to have to prove, right? Like, if you go in tomorrow to work and you say, hey, this is sexual harassment, I don't have to take it anymore, I make a formal complaint, and of course you're smart, so you get it in writing, you have an email, it's timestamped by a third-party email server that doesn't care about the situation, like, say, Gmail, and you retain a copy of that so you can prove that you complained. You can prove that you engage in protected activity, and you make your complaint. And they say, oh my goodness, we'll absolutely investigate this for you. But your TPS reports were falsified. You're like, what? No, they're not falsified. I do my TPS reports just like everybody else. On the last day of the month, I get them right. What are you talking about? Like, no. We think that you falsified your TPS reports. We're going to have to let you go. That's a pretext, right? I mean, presumably, if there is actually any issue with your TPS report, they knew about it for some period of time. Now you've complained, so they're going to use that to get rid of you when it seems like they didn't care that much before because they hadn't fired you yet. But also, even more likely, they're making it up completely. Like, they didn't even know there was something good or bad with the TPS reports. They're just trying to get you now because they want you out because you're complaining and they're retaliating. Now, they're going to bear the burden to prove that the TPS report falsification issue is the real reason why they're terminating you. You, of course, are going to want to fight that because you want to prove, hey, that was a pretext. I was fired because I engaged in protected activity, complaining about sexual harassment. Very clear cut. You can see the value of that to your claim. It's going to help you win your retaliation claim, and it's probably going to bolster your original sexual harassment claim as well. It can be off-putting to people that in at-will employment, there is a near infinite. I mean, the limitation on the reasons that you could be fired for under at-will employment, the only limitation is the human imagination, right? Like if you can think of a reason, like I don't like Vince. I don't like Vince. He's got them beady eyes. And let's assume beady eyes are not a trait of a given race or national origin or whatever, right? I think that's just beady eyes is like a trait that they said in Westerns. I think. I don't know. Now, that would actually be a legal reason to fire Vince in that scenario, right? He's got them beady eyes. Can't stand him. Vince has got that crooked tooth. Hate him. Vince is a fan of the Buffalo Bills, and I've never seen a sorrier football team in all my life. So I hate Vince because the Buffalo Bills let Jordan Poyer go. And Tre'Davious White. And both of those things were functionally crimes. All those reasons would be legal reasons to fire Vince. Me, right? But if I recently engaged in protected activity, like I went in and I testified in somebody else's workplace discrimination claim, and I said what I saw, and I spoke honestly. And now they're coming at me and they're saying, listen, Vince, you're a Bills fan and we hate the Bills because they let Jordan Poyer and Tre'Davious White go this week. So we're firing you. That's a pretext, right? They can say it's because of the Buffalo Bills and their ruthless efforts to get back under salary cap. But it's probably not. And I'm probably going to have some success in making it difficult for them to prove that this isn't retaliation, right? So that's generally how it works, right? I think Tech 5280, what I think is tripping people up is that it could be any reason, right? There's a lot of people like, but what could the pretext be? Any reason. Or no reason at all. Like, you could have a pretext as like, Vince, I think your time here is done. You've grown as much as you'll grow in this role. It's time for greener pastures and bigger and better things for you, Vince. I mean, that sounds almost like no reason at all. I guess it's technically a reason. But even if they're just like, yeah, we're just letting you go. I mean, I guess they're not given a reason, so there's no pretext, but it operates very similarly to a pretext in that, well, you can probably prove there's a component of retaliation here because you did engage in that protected activity, right? So don't let the infinite unknown of the depths of the human mind, all the reasons they might come up with to act against you, don't let that confuse you. That's just how human beings work, right? Like we walk around all day thinking there's a finite number of ways things can go. That's generally false. It's just that there's a lot of folks doing the same things over and over and over again because they already saw them and they're not that creative. So they're copying what they've seen before. Hey, I heard that happen one time, so let's fire Vince for this. It's easier than I've been sitting here making up brand new reasons to fire Vince because secretly we want him out because he engaged in that there protected activity, right? That's just a limitation, again, of the human imagination. And the average human doesn't love using their imagination all that much, unless they're thinking up ways to torture themselves or others. Anyways, Tech 5280, I hope this helps. I hope this adds a little bit of context to the notion of pretext and protected activity and retaliatory termination in at-will environments. And thank you for the question. I think that your question is something that I didn't understand was confusing, and the way you asked it taught me that it is confusing. Like, I read it and I was like, oh, I get the confusion. I get it. I mean, I think we can address it, but I get it, you know? So thank you for your service to the channel by bringing this question. I hope that we repaid your service to the channel by bringing your question with a good answer. If it was a good answer, if it was helpful, like, subscribe, comment down below, share our channel so it can grow. And remember that like button. I mean, for real, that like button helps the YouTube algorithm know who we are, and it helps us on our path to 100,000 subscribers, which I believe we'll be reaching near April of 2024, which is very exciting. Near or in April of 2024. Anyways, take care, everyone. Bye. Oh, yeah, call volume super high today, and we're a little short-staffed, so, like, if you're trying to call me, you're like, why is Vince putting up a video instead of calling me back? We're doing our best, but I gotta do a video every day. The videos are, like, my, like, free service, so, like, I can't just not make a video. So, yeah, I'm gonna keep working the phones. I also worked over the weekend returning calls, believe it or not, which normally I personally wouldn't do, but I did want to get back to people. I didn't want to leave people hanging, so that's what's going on with the phones if you're trying to reach us right now. Take care.